Okay, so now we're going to transition to the two other potential screenings, Ex Machina and Truman Show. I'm going to begin with Ex Machina because it follows more logically from Gamer. And also, I think that even if you hadn't had time to watch it for this week, I'd strongly recommend that you watch it. So I think beyond its, of course, focus on artificial intelligence and the potentiality that an AI may have consciousness, which is the major focus and theme of the film, I'd like to make a couple of notes about the form of the film as well. Now, beyond the special effects, beyond the screenplay, I think the mise en scène is also quite interesting, especially how it begins at placing the human at the center of all these machines that are recording his facial expressions, the data, and the fact that already the human-machine interface seems to be much more permeable than we may imagine. And there's this sort of montage sequence at the beginning that cuts between sort of a straight close-up camera shot to one that sort of records Caleb's facial feature. There's also a slight progression in the opening sequence where, of course, we go from the completely sort of glass machine office environment to this sort of stark, expansive, natural environment where Caleb travels to Nathan's compound or research facility, as he calls it. So there's this interesting dualism established between human and machine, and the fact that it's at first in a opening sequence that it's permeable in the sense that human-machine interacts and interface quite directly, and then the stark contrast between the sort of vast landscapes and the fully automated home, which may remind you of the home in the Welt. And of course, this motif of human-machine, or even centered around the conflict of man versus machine, is central to the development of that plot. In addition, brief word about the structure, the way in which the film is structured. In the facilities, you notice there's these sort of title screens of Ava Session 1, Ava Session 2, etc., all the way to Session 7, which also represents the seventh day that Caleb is there, but also is Ava's sort of escape and her attaining emancipation or freedom. And that's also where the point of view changes from that predominantly of Caleb all throughout the first 6 days till the seventh day, where there's a switch to Ava's point of view. Of course, it replicates the Genesis episode of the Bible, the ways in which the world was created in 7 days, and the seventh day God rested. In this case, God is put to rest, literally. That who created Ava is put to rest as Nathan is killed at the end. Also, there's the ways in which Ava is framed from the onset as this purely sort of anthropomorphic robot, where we see all her machinery for reasons that Nathan explains, just to make it evident that she's a machine, and hence that the interlocutor, that is Caleb, doesn't get fooled by her appearance as mistaking her for being human. But also a particular scene that's very interesting, where that sort of the beginning of the deceit is initiated, is when Ava gets dressed. And it's done in a series of close-ups, very much the inverse of a striptease in the way in which it puts her clothes, but there's emphasis on, right, her slowly dressing up, selecting the clothes to seduce, in a way, Caleb. And what is also emphasized in that scene, which is further emphasized whenever the point of view switches from man to machine, is the haptic quality of the shot. And what I mean by that is that there are these close-ups of Ava's using her hands to feel. And the ways in which, for example, Kyoko and Ava communicate is very much in a haptic touch sense. So that's also interesting, because we de-emphasize the sense of sight towards feeling, touching, and more directly what we mean when one says, do you feel this, refers to the sense of touch. And that's sort of leads into Nathan's emphasis when he asks Caleb all these questions, whether or not he has achieved AI, what do you feel? So feeling primes over every other senses, perhaps because the way in which it is configured in the film is the one that is most true to achieving consciousness. So, and also there's these, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of form are sort of all these shots that are framed within the CCTV surveillance cameras, which in themselves give you a narrative, of course, that switches because depending on who uses the CCTV feed, tells a different story. That's revealed when Nathan explains to Caleb that he was onto them the entire time. There's also a play there with the surveillance cameras, with the voyeur that sometimes Caleb is when he's observing Ava, but also the exhibitionist that Ava becomes as part of her seducing Caleb. So, in terms of content, the narrative, one of the concepts that is triggered is that of the Turing test. And the Turing test, just to give you a brief overview, is where one person asks questions to two interlocutors, two respondents. They're behind the screens, so the person who asks questions doesn't know who is who, and to determine which one is the computer. That's the classic Turing test. So what they're doing here is some version of the Turing test to determine whether or not the AI, i.e. Ava, has reached self-awareness or consciousness. Whether or not, as the question is repeated twice in the film, whether or not Ava is expressing a real emotion or just simulating one. And there's the emphasis of emotion, again, on feeling things, and of course the idea that Ava may develop feelings for Caleb when, in fact, the test is revealed that Caleb is the test subject, because Ava is able to make him feel or fall in love for her. I'm going to interrupt briefly now, and I'm going to continue in the second part of the lecture because I'm reaching 8 minutes.